Dr. Greg, and today we're working on a 1997 Jeep Cherokee XJ. This vehicle needs rear brakes, but it also needs hard brake lines. Right here is our big box of rear drum parts, drum, shoes, hardware, brake cables. But several years ago, when we were doing the lift kit on this and putting the extended brake lines on, I noticed that the brake lines were severely corroded. It's about 22 years old now, and any vehicle that sees a lot of road salt or is down the beach or is just getting older is going to have corrosion of the brake lines. As you can see, we're working on a stone driveway, which is less than ideal, but if this vehicle had lost its brakes here, it might be the only choice where you're going to work there. So what we noticed when we were doing the extended brake lines for the lift kit is that this fitting right here started to twist off. Now if you look closely, you can see where it tore. I knew this was probably going to happen, which is why we're doing this preventatively. Last time we used a lot of penetrating oil on there to get it to spin, and this time it did not. So one of the tricks here, since I'm working on a stone driveway, I don't want to be under that car, spend a lot of time bending and flaring lines, and I knew that it was pretty rusty. So I opted to cut it off preemptively. I use a set of tubing cutters at an angle, shears, so that I can see how it's oriented before. That way, when I'm unscrewing this, it doesn't twist the whole line and throw off the angle. So I followed up the frame rail, and it was rusty pretty much all the way up across a transfer case cross member right here. And then right afterwards, I elected to cut it again to remove it as two pieces. Again, I used some shears on a nice heavy angle so I could orient it and see which way the bends go. And followed it all the way up, and the corrosion stops right as it makes the turn to go up to the master cylinder right here, where I again cut it. Also, while I was doing this, where the brake line that goes to the right front of the vehicle comes down off the master cylinder and goes under the steering arm, there's corrosion there as well. So since I'm going to have the brake system apart, I'll be bleeding brakes and bending lines, I bought enough line to do this, and that's going to have a union joint right up on the firewall where it is not corroded, where it's a nice easy place to get to. Each place that I cut is someplace that I can easily have a union and get under there and tighten it up. And then what I'm going to do is buy this in sections, 60-inch sections, and have fittings at strategic locations where I can get under there very quickly, tighten up the fitting, and if need be, when I'm trying to bleed the brakes, come back and crack that fitting open to get the air out. The tools I'll need for this job are box wrenches. I also have flare wrenches, which have a more closed configuration on the open end. You're going to need standard and metric because 90s Chrysler vehicles mix their fittings. So some of them are standard, some of them are metric. For that rear line that twisted, I actually used small vice grips to grab a hold of that because even the flare wrenches were not enough to loosen it up. Here are my shears. I used to make those angle cuts. I did that intentionally so that I could get it out in sections and reinstall it in sections, and each place where there's a cut is where I'm going to have a union. We have a tubing bender. Typically I bend using mostly my thumbs for the gentle bends, but I do use this on 90-degree bends because it's just too easy to kink on 90-degree bends. We have our tubing cutter. You cut here, and you can deburr after you cut with this point right here. We have our basic flare set. If you were doing this in a shop and you were doing a brake job, and all of a sudden you realize that you had a problem with brake line corrosion, they do have some real nice flare tools out there now. We can flare inline right up in the frame rail. I don't have access to those, and I knew I was going to be replacing the whole line, so I did not opt to go that fancy. We have some of our standard fittings. Here's a union, and we have our our steel nuts that go behind the flares once we make the flare. And this is our standard tubing, 60 inches long. It's coated with a nice corrosion-resistant coating on here, so it should hold up better than the factory line. I do like using this tubing just for that reason. And of course, we have some synthetic brake fluid to bleed out the brakes when we're all done. Now, if you were working on a classic car, this tubing can get pre-bent in stainless, but it's very expensive. You're talking a couple $100 to do a whole car. This was $7 for 60 inches. To do everything we're doing here, we only used two 60-inch sections and some leftovers from a previous job. I think all in all, the parts for this job were less than $30. If you're going to be doing this a lot, where you live in an area where you see a lot of vehicles that have rusty brake lines, you can buy entire rolls of brake line and just have it right on the shelf there. But I only do this every couple years. So as you can see here, this is our 3/16 line all bent up. I start at one end. Okay, so we start from the back. We have our 3/16 line with a standard fitting on the end that goes to our brake hose. We worked forward and followed each bend. Nice thing about doing this method is I can go up on the back porch, a nice clean work environment, take my time, got a nice new line. I'm not under the car trying to do this. It follows pretty closely all the way up. We get to right in front of the transfer case cross member, and that's where I like to put in a union, so I can put this into two pieces. I can slide the back half in from the back, and the front half I can slide in from the engine compartment. Follows up along the unibody rail, makes a turn up the firewall, and then right here I transferred this short section of the line from the old line. These are all metric fittings that go to the master cylinder. They're a little harder to find, and they weren't corroded, so I elected to keep those. From there, on the front right brake line, I started at the master cylinder. I reused, again, a metric fitting right here and flared that onto my new line. Follow the contours all the way down, lining up each one for both angle and direction to make sure I'm following the lines properly, so I can have them properly routed around other wiring and other brake lines. The union is right here underneath of the steering joint on the steering, which is easy to access from underneath the car by the oil pan. Comes up, does 90, comes across, and then I have another flare right here. It'll be going to a union where it'll mate to the non-corroded factory brake line, nice and high on the firewall, an easy place to get to. And that's about it. So from this point I can uninstall all of it, redo my drums, and then when I'm done I'll bleed it all out. And also where all the unions are is a nice easy place to get to. I can check and make sure there's no leaks anywhere, and hopefully these brake lines will last another 22 years. Alright guys, take it easy.